Welcome to Tox News, your only source into cancel culture. I'm your host, the wacko weirdo rebel scum Jedi hero. And we've got a couple of segments today. One coming from Daily Wire's Matt Walsh on how cancel culture mobs... Wait, it says cancel culture mob gets conservative actress fired. Feeding into that tyrannical oppression they feel just because. And then we have Tucker Carlson on why the left wants to shut down Fox News. Will there be any truth to any of these? Find out now on Tox News. But first, you like that traditional news segue thing that I just did there? That's how you do it. But first, we want to begin. Oh, I just restarted the outro rather than letting it slowly fade into the quiet night. So we have, first, I think since the segments are a bit short, and I usually try to fill an hour for the podcast, we have the impeachment trial going live right now. Trump's attorney, Michael Van Der Veen. Wow, what a name. Michael Van Der Veen. His defense is being propped up right now, so let's check it out.
The direct quote was documented in the Founding Fathers' original legal papers. Do I have those with me?
This is happening now
on the
live
subject.
As we're recording this.
He was the primary draftsman of the Constitution who taught the new Constitution to President Washington. He says so long as acts of elected officials like Mr. Trump are constitutionally protected, he should not be impeached. We have landmark U.S. Supreme Court decisions, Wood and Bonds, which I'll explain in detail, supporting our position. All of this, the House managers and the partisan law professors completely and misleadingly ignore. Frivolous? Hardly. The letter is a bully tactic, and I think evidence is the House managers know they have a problem with the First Amendment defense on the merits.
So he's been arguing for a minute. I've been listening to it here, how Congress cannot police the president's speech. They cannot hold him accountable for his speech per the First Amendment. The unfortunate thing is that a Supreme Court ruling did rule that incitement to riot, which again is a charge brought up against President Trump. Incitement to riot is not protected by the First Amendment. That was a Supreme Court ruling. Can't remember the specific case that it was. That's for the Googlers. But, I'll let him speak a little bit more and I'll find the case here. But Supreme Court ruling not in Trump's favor in this argument.
Protections. We are here under the Constitution. It is illogical what the House managers say. The Constitution does apply to this constitutional impeachment process. It's double talk, nonsense, illogical. If the House managers had their way, they would ignore.
I mean, I really like that he said that it is double talk, even though the correct term is double speak. But again, trying to get all these conservatives to feel like we're living in an Orwellian dystopia.
Lawyers. And who would be next? It could be anyone. One of you. Or one of you. You must reject this invitation to ignore the First Amendment.
All right, so imminent lawless action is a standard currently used that was established by the United States Supreme Court in Brandenburg v. Ohio in 1969 for defining the limits of freedom of speech. Brandenburg clarified what constituted a clear and present danger, the standard established by Schneck v. United States in 1919 and overruled Whitney v. California 1927, which had held that speech that merely advocated violence could be made illegal. Under the imminent lawless action test, speech is not protected by the First Amendment if the speaker intends to incite a violation of the law that is both imminent and likely. So, his argument, if he was a lawyer, he would easily know, is a bad argument.
free speech rights because he is an elected official.
Like, honestly, how the fuck does a random dude with a podcast know that? And this lawyer just simply ignores it. He's either ignoring it or is completely ignorant of the ruling.
Intellectual dishonesty. The Supreme Court has long held that the First Amendment's right to freedom of speech protects elected officials. Two important on-point decisions from the Supreme Court, Wood versus Georgia and Bond versus Floyd, expressly contradict the House manager's position.
It's very fascinating that he's aware of these two cases, but unfortunately is unaware of the case that I just told you about, Brandenburg v. Ohio.
On them yesterday. In Wood versus Georgia, the Supreme Court addressed a case involving a sitting sheriff whose reelection was being investigated by a grand jury and paneled by a judge based on allegations of irregular Negro bloc voting. It was in the 60s. The sheriff spoke publicly in multiple press releases calling the grand jury.
He did not need to say that. Wow, that clip is probably going to go viral. Oh, wow. Like, it's not in the 1960s anymore, dude. Like, you did not need to use that. Oh, wow. And yeah, this specific case that he's arguing here is not as applicable as Brandenburg v. Ohio. It specifically has to do with rumors and accusations, and it has to do with the use of inane and inexplicable pattern of N-word block voting. You could have said black people, honestly, but like, wow, he actually dropped the N-bomb as if he's in the 1960s and it's still okay. That's amazing.
Contempt of court and obstruction of the grand jury. But the Supreme Court, in a decision written by Justice Brennan, reversed. The court held that the First Amendment protected an elected public official's speech because the voting controversy directly affected the sheriff's political career. G29. The petitioner was an elected official and had, read with me, please, everybody. The petitioner was an elected official and had the right to enter the field of political controversy, particularly where his political life was at stake. The role that elected officials play in our society makes it all the more imperative that they be allowed freely to express themselves on matters of current public importance.
So he's basically arguing that Trump is immune because of political office. And so if we're going to assume that Brandenburg v. Ohio doesn't apply to elected officials, but only applies to those who aren't elected officials, then we're starting to see a bit of an unjust system. Then like there's obvious privilege to be in a political office and incite riots because he's arguing that it's at stake of their political life or career. So what a horrible argument to make. Basically putting politicians on a pedestal for their First Amendment rights above everybody else.
Bond is particularly instructive here too. In Bond, the Supreme Court squarely addressed the question of an elected official's punishment by a legislature for statements alleged to have incited public violation of the law, the burning of draft cards. The court unequivocally rejected the idea, advanced here by the House managers, that an elected official is entitled to no protection under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court held that the Georgia House of Representatives was, in fact, forbidden by the First Amendment from punishing Bond, by not seating him, for advocating against the policy of the United States. There are three fundamental holdings in Bond. One, the manifest function of the First Amendment in a representative government requires that legislators be given the widest latitude to express their views on issues of policy. Two, Just as erroneous statements must be protected to give freedom of expression the breathing space it needs to survive, so statements criticizing public policy and the implementation of it must be similarly protected. Third holding. Legislators have an obligation to take positions on controversial political questions so that their constituents can be fully informed by them and be better able to assess their qualifications. Please read along with me. Their qualifications for office. Also, so they may be represented in governmental debates by the person they have elected to represent them. Mr. Trump enjoys this same First Amendment protection from Congress. The First Amendment's protections guarantee free speech addressing the electoral integrity issues essential to his career that Mr. Trump has consistently advocated.
So what he's basically arguing here is that it's okay for elected officials to peddle conspiracy theories because it's well within their right to take positions that may be controversial. No, I don't like that idea, and I think that Brandenburg v. Ohio should be upheld, and that incitement to action or lawlessness by an elected official or by anybody should be upheld by the law. So genuinely disagree with his reading of the First Amendment and the cherry-picked Supreme Court cases that he decided to go with. So there's a little sample of the defense that's going on today. Today is solely focused on Trump's defense. I think that the trial itself is supposed to be wrapped up by tomorrow at the time of this recording on Saturday, February 13th. And I'm not sure if they're going to have a ruling by then, but that's apparently when most of it's supposed to be wrapped up. But moving on here, we're going to get into Daily Wire's Matt Walsh and how cancel culture mob got a conservative actress fired. Lego.
You probably know I'm not a fan of Disney or Star Wars, and had never seen The Mandalorian or heard the name Gina Carano before yesterday. What I learned about Miss Carano, though, from reading mainstream media headlines and sifting through some of the tweets under the Fire Gina Carano hashtag.
So, I mean, literally the only reason why Matt Walsh got connected into this story itself is because Gina Carano is a public conservative. She's openly conservative. And honestly, too, her posts have a lot of conspiratorial thoughts to them as well. So I would say that she's a little bit more far-right leaning. I haven't seen necessarily any siding with like militias or other groups like Marjorie Greene Taylor and Laura Boebert, but we are seeing her kind of peddling a bit of transphobia and some conspiracy theories, especially when it comes to the election. So,
tag is that she's a bigot and a psychopath and a transphobe and an anti-Semite and a danger to herself and others.
I don't necessarily agree with all of the adjectives that he threw on there, but when you're a public speaker and you're pushing out the same kind of misinformation that everybody else has been punished on Twitter for, you got to kind of wonder whether or not the ban hammer was justified. And the thing that I found is that this is not, like, Gina Carano was not fired off of this one event of the Holocaust posting. And Matt Walsh will get into that further, but she was... I found articles that are over a month old of people either hashtagging Fire Gina Carano. One of them was following a COVID-19 memorial post made by Lucasfilm, and there was a time that Jon Favreau, who works with Disney a lot, he directed The Jungle Book and I think Iron Man 2. Jon Favreau, he also made Swingers, if you know Swingers. Jon Favreau reportedly stopped Disney from firing Mandalorian star Gina Carano, and he doesn't necessarily take political positions. He just didn't see it fit to fire somebody for their political views. And the fellow star of The Mandalorian also showed solidarity about a month ago with Gina Carano. Pedro Pascal, I think his name is. He also made it clear that he was not okay with them firing her based on her political views. The difficulty thing is, though, is with like how open she was with her political views, constantly like making every tweet almost about that stuff. So Disney kind of felt the pressure from the mob and from the hashtag warriors to let go of Gina Carano, although she seemed to kind of be an imploding star on herself because she could not stop posting these controversial views.
I learned that she has now been booted from her role on The Mandalorian and fired by Disney. A cause for celebration, I'm told, after an Instagram post that became sort of the final straw. That post has been reported by media outlets like USA Today and Chicago Sun-Times as straightforwardly anti-Semitic. Not even like some people claim it's anti-Semitic or some people see it as anti-Semitic, but that it is just simply anti-Semitic. This Gina Carano person, I mean, she seems like a pretty unsavory character. Anti-Semitic posts, transphobic, she's bigoted, all these things. Pretty bad. Or she would seem that way to anyone stupid enough to still take the popular narrative at face value. The rest of us will want to do a little bit more research into the topic and form our own judgments. It doesn't take much research to discover that the narrative is, once again, completely and utterly bogus. So, what did the now deleted Instagram post that has been dubbed anti-Semitic by not only the media, but her former employer actually say? I mean, Lucasfilm sent out a statement declaring that Carano's, quote, social media posts denigrating people based on their cultural and religious beliefs are abhorrent and unacceptable. Abhorrent and unacceptable.
I think I'm not sure the wording of the Disney thing was completely 100%, but I don't know how everybody necessarily feels about it. The thing about saying that, conservatives' views being opposed is like being a Jew in Nazi Germany, it's just not a great equivalency to make. And I went and did a Twitter post about it, so I'm just going to scroll down and read it because it's much easier for me to do that. Let me see here. So I began by saying, of course, conservatives are mad about Gina Carano because their imagined oppression is a collective imagined oppression. Having your political views opposed is nowhere near being moved into concentration camps. Being fired from a job for comments you made, that you did of your free will, is not the same as being fired for simply existing as a Jew. Being in overcrowded detention centers separated from your family with a lack of basic human rights while conservatives ignore your suffering is a much more apt comparison as to how quote-unquote neighbors persecuted the Jews. And that's genuinely how I feel. The right wing did spend most of Trump's presidency denigrating and dehumanizing asylum seekers, saying that they were an invading caravan of illegal immigrants or illegal aliens. And so that language is much more fit to the comparison of how Jews were treated just before moving into the concentration camps. This is the dehumanizing of asylum seekers and immigrants is much more apt in this comparison rather than conservatives who are having a hard time expressing their views, which do tend to be on the side of exclusionary racism, transphobia, xenophobia, like a lot of these, and it feeds into this idea of American exceptionalist nationalism that conservatives have really been garnering under Trump's presidency. So let's just acknowledge that. Matt Walsh isn't going to, but we did.
Is there any basis for this charge? Well, decide for yourself. The post in question appears to be a screenshot of somebody else.
And like I said, it's not just this one post. This has been going on for at least a month, as far as I can tell from the articles that I have found before, because she also questioned the efficacy of the vaccines, which also feed into like the anti-vaxxer conspiracy theories. And then she also posted about mail-in voting and voting fraud, which feeds into Trump's conspiracy theories that this was a stolen election. So she's a little bit more far right than we're admitting here.
Else's post, which Carano had reposted to her own Instagram. It says, this is what it says: Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views?
I mean, it's the same thing as that, like the right-wing media got everyone to, or at least those who consume right-wing media earnestly. They got them to dehumanize and fervently oppose BLM just for being a part of BLM. So, like, the whole time, everybody's saying, like, we agree that what happened to George Floyd was wrong and there needs to be police reform, but you guys can't keep going out in the streets and being rioting criminals destroying the country. And so that's that kind of ad hominem kind of dehumanizing that they did all summer long, even though 97% of the protests were peaceful protests, and we had, or 93%, and then we had 7% that were riots. And even though that 7% may be large, all that 93%, 100% were eventually moved under that rioter banner because that allowed them to oppose without necessarily taking in any actual views or any actual goal of the protest movements.
That's it. That was the post. Anti-Semitic? Denigrating people based on their cultural and religious identities? What? It's the opposite of that, actually.
See, and that's why I don't necessarily agree with the perspective that Disney had put out, especially with Disney having, like, Walt Disney having huge anti-Semitic views back in the day. But I think the fundamental problem here is the conspiracy of conservatives being oppressed for being conservatives, feeding that narrative. And just like I said earlier, it's not an apt comparison to say that conservatives in their views being opposed is like being a Jew in Nazi Germany. It's just not apt.
She is comparing our current political environment to Nazi Germany in an unfavorable way. She's not saying it's good that it's like this. And by the way, if making a Nazi comparison is anti-Semitic, then everyone in the country is a raging anti-Semite. As everyone knows, Nazi comparisons are the most common rhetorical strategy in any debate. They may be way overused, and they are, and overwrought, and they often are.
And I agree with this because we tend to always do that when we see like authoritarian aspects or characteristics, when we do need to be a bit more focused on authoritarianism, because American fascism isn't going to look like Nazi or Germany fascism or Nazi fascism. It's gonna have its own spin on it that's going to be not so persecutive on Jews. I see it more focused probably on immigrants, most likely, and not the white kind, but the brown kind. So I think that the left needs to kind of restructure its arguments and rhetoric just a little bit, just tweak it slightly to just kind of focus on authoritarianism rather than constantly trying to point out fascism or Nazism, just because that kind of zones it in when most of these regimes that everybody disagrees with is actually fundamentally just authoritarian.
But there's nothing shocking or offensive or abhorrent about this one single example of a thing that you can find in a billion other places on the internet.
And the thing is that I would agree that it's abhorrent to think that conservatives, especially with a lot of them being middle class or upper class, saying that they're oppressed on the level of Jews, that to me is abhorrent because, again, it's this collective imagined oppression that's just not really there. Their views are being opposed. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of their views do fit in the realm of misinformation. And then the farther right that you go, it gets more conspiratorial. So this kind of disinformation campaign actually has to be opposed in a lot of variant ways with a diversity of tactics. But again, they're living in a different reality than a lot of people at this point. And so their imagined oppression does come from the fact that they are being opposed, but they're not being rounded up. They're not being crucified. Their lives aren't really at risk. They're just being forced to go into their own gated community that says that you have to believe what we believe. Otherwise, you're a tyrannical oppressor.
And everyone has done it. Jews and non-Jews alike. We have all been guilty, apparently, at various points of making Nazi analogies. In fact, as Nazi analogies go, this one gets closer to the truth than most. I mean, she's correct that
And I say no, the treatment of asylum seekers at the southern border is much more closer than conservatives feeling like they're being opposed.
Lead up to any Holocaust-level atrocity always involves the dehumanization of a certain group of people. Now, I would say this has already happened in this country to the unborn. 60 million have been slaughtered because of it. Is it happening to conservatives too? Well,
I mean, it's such like a or like it's a paradoxical statement to say that the unborn have been dehumanized when they haven't been like even biologically humanized. So that's a very weird way to say that, but I guess you could, like, the through line there in this narrative spin is that, like, of course the leftists are all for genocide. Look at what they're doing to our unborn children. So that, yeah, great spin there, Matt.
We're not being rounded up and executed, obviously, but her point is
Obviously.
simply to show where trends can lead when taken to their most violent extreme. Now, say what you want about that, but if you say that she's denigrating Jews somehow, then, well, you're lying.
I would say that she's denigrating the experience that the Jews had. Like I said, because most of the conservatives that are feeling this imagined oppression are a bit more comfortable, especially the ones who are feeding the narrative to the working class conservatives who don't necessarily have the same things come about them because they tend to keep their views either to themselves or don't necessarily try to oppose or offend others when they speak their political views. I've met conservatives who feel that immigrants should be assisted with human dignity, which isn't necessarily afforded to immigrants by other conservatives who say that they're all criminal rapists. That's that dehumanizing language that can make it a lot easier for a conservative or basically anybody. As long as you dehumanize someone enough, somebody would be willing to commit violence against that person because they do not see the humanity within them.
Straight up. And I hope she has a team of lawyers ready to sue Lucasfilm for this defamation. That is defamation of character. They accused her of doing something that she absolutely did not do. It's not even that you could interpret it in that way. You cannot.
And just like everybody else who has been ostracized by like mainstream Hollywood or society for their either like further right views or their just kind of I guess bigoted views, they go like what's his name? Brian Callen. He had a podcast that was somewhat popular called Fighter and the Kid with Brendan Schaub. And then Brian Callen had accusations of rape and molestation come out against him, and he had to leave that podcast. But what he ended up doing after that was creating a podcast that was all about conspiracy theories. And then he did a whole round on, I think, Dave Rubin's show. He was on Candace Owens' show. He started doing right-wing shows throughout because obviously the right wing isn't really that concerned with the rape allegations or molestation allegations that were made against Brian Callen because they like Brian Callen and they like what he has to say. So the same thing kind of happened here with Gina Carano, is that now Daily Wire is going to make a movie with her because they like what she does. They like her views. So it's not necessarily like them being ostracized, getting canceled, and their career falls apart. They go into that gated community of conservatism and continue to work on their misinformation propaganda machine.
And no literate person could read what she posted and see that as her denigrating Jews.
I think it denigrated their experience.
Of course, sit here all day pulling examples of leftists making Nazi and Holocaust comparisons. They spent 4 years doing it relentlessly every day. And Donald Trump never staged any mass executions of any political dissidents.
But again, his treatment of the immigrant asylum seekers and refugees and the Muslim ban, that's a lot closer. That's a lot closer, especially when he banned Syria and Yemen, which is having like one of the largest refugee crises since the end of World War II. So there is an apt comparison to a little bit of fascism in Donald Trump, especially with his ultra-nationalist characteristics. But there still, again, like I said, the left needs to refocus the argument into an anti-authoritarian because it's a much more apt comparison before you really get into the exact dehumanization and rounding up of the asylum seekers. And the terrifying thing is that he rounded up all of these asylum seekers into these detention centers, and then COVID happened. And so then they were trapped in this facility, and it's not like they were gassing them, but they had to suffer through a deadly virus while being held, and I think the other thing that happened during Trump's presidency is that they were sterilizing women at the border. So again, that gets them much closer to a level of not quite genocide, but definitely that's a human rights violation. I would say.
Yet that didn't stop anyone from calling him Hitler. We could even pull examples of
My favorite nickname of Trump was Twitler, but yeah.
of other Disney actors on the same show making Nazi comparisons. Pedro Pascal, another actor on The Mandalorian, tweeted in 2018, hashtag This Is America. And you can see it here.
But again, it's a much more apt comparison. You see kids behind wires in pinstripe suits in Germany, 1944, and then you see kids behind bars in America, 2018. It is a much more apt comparison. We didn't necessarily round them up, but they came to us, and then we proceeded to keep them not in the same kind of work camps that Germany had, but we did keep them in concentration camps nonetheless.
Here, he says, This Is America, hashtag, with a picture of Jews in concentration camps in 1944. On top of a picture of...
I am genuinely interested in hearing Matt Walsh argue how this is a less apt comparison than the oppression of conservatives.
Infamous kids in cages in America in 2018. So there's the Nazi comparison. Except that, as far as I could tell, that's not really from 2018. It's from 2010, and it's not from America either. Well,
wait,
minor details. Oh, and by the way, it's also, those kids are all...
Wait, what? That's from 2010? He provides absolutely no proof to back up that claim. And it may be true because Obama did have... Obama also set up these concentration camps in tent cities as well. The only thing that makes the difference between the Trump presidency and the Obama presidency is that Trump systematically separated families and then neglectfully was like, the record keeping is so bad that thousands of kids are not going to be reunited with their family anytime soon. That's a big difference between Trump and Obama. I'm not going to praise Obama for building tent cities and concentration camps to keep families in. That's also abhorrent. But Trump took it a step further in the level of cruelty.
Also not in a cage. You could tell, if you look at the far left end of the photo there, that there's a large opening where the kids can come and go.
I can't tell 100%, but there does seem to be bars on the left. It looks like an opening for them to get like served like those plastic bags that they're handing out. And one of the kids on the bottom is reaching up to grab one of those bags. So I don't think they're free to come and go. That again, like, and he provides absolutely no evidence to back up any of his claims. Like the fact that he can't even show that this is from 2010 just shows that he's only trying to do some whataboutism that everybody's aware of, especially the conservative media, that Obama too did also lock up immigrants and asylum seekers. But that's, again, Trump took it a step further in cruelty.
So it's a picture of kids in cages in America in 2018, except it's not from 2018, it's not from America, and they're not in a cage. Hey, other than that...
Again, he provides no evidence to back up this claim. He just says it.
It's correctly labeled. In any case, despite common misconceptions, Trump was not rounding up and executing immigrants. He detained them, as Obama did and as Biden is doing right now, and then if they were here illegally...
Yeah, Biden is dealing with the aftermath of Trump's policies, though. And the unfortunate thing is that Biden is turning away new asylum-seeking applications because of the way that Trump had organized the asylum-seeking process. So I wish there was more that Biden could do. I don't like that Biden opened up yet another facility to house 4,000 kids. But we're dealing with, like, at least 2 years of Trump's immigration policies, because 2018 was when we saw a huge spike in asylum seekers.
He sent them home. That is not at all even slightly analogous to Nazi Germany. No part of that is the same.
Yeah, it is. Before the concentration camps were built, Hitler tried to send the Jews to other nations. The unfortunate thing was, though, is that no other nations wanted to take the Jews in. So with an overflow of Jews, Hitler had to come up with something. And so that's after that's when he decided that, well, they're not really leaving far enough and we're working them to death, but they're not dying quick enough. So we got to start moving it faster. And that's when the gas chambers and egregious execution started to come into place, is because their countries of, they were in their country of origin, but nobody would accept their refugee status. And so Hitler did what? Hitler also, when he invaded other countries, started looking for the Jews there to put them into concentration camps. That's not necessarily apt to Trump's, but the unfortunate thing is that, yeah, Trump didn't have to round them up because they came to him. But also, no, actually, Trump did round up people. Is that the ICE started doing numerous raids, arresting people, and a lot of people who like, there were a couple cases too that they were U.S. citizens born in America, but their parents were immigrants, and they ended up being sent to their parents' country of origin. I think one was in Haiti and the other was in Syria. They were deported, and one of them, they didn't speak Syrian, they didn't speak Haitian, but they were forced to stay there and try to survive with no resources. So there are some comparisons here to the Trump presidency a little bit. Although Trump did not take it to the final solution part, he didn't take it to work camps part, but he did capture and hold immigrants and refugees. That happened. That did happen.
The only similarity is that both involved governments and both involved some form of detainment. So by Pedro's logic...
But again, ICE did do raids. They did do that.
Every government then is effectively a Nazi government, including the current one running this country right now.
I mean, we're not going to argue that like most countries don't have authoritarian aspects to them. The thing that I love that George Carlin said is that we may have won World War II, or we may have defeated Germany, but believe me, fascism won the war. And that's because a lot of countries took notes from Germany. In fact, so much so that they granted citizenship to some of their scientists and proceeded to create inventions based off of Nazi Germany or Nazi scientists. So,
but he wasn't fired for that. The reason has a lot to do with those pronouns that you can see in his bio, which function like the lamb's blood on the door, signaling for the angel of cancellation to pass over. Incidentally, that's one of the other offensive things that Carano did or didn't do. One of the straws before the final one, apparently she refused to put pronouns in her bio. Now, that's really one of the things that made people mad at her. Is that?
No, it wasn't. It was the pronouns that she decided to put into her bio, which were beep, boop, and bop. So it sounds like you don't take trans people very seriously, and you think that their idea of wanting preferred pronouns is ridiculous and silly. So you made it silly. If Pedro Pascal has them in his bio, it's to show solidarity with other trans people that you are welcome in his book. By putting beep, bop, boop, that says your pronouns are not welcome in my point of view. You are ridiculous and silly, and as ridiculous and silly as beep, bop, and boop.
That she didn't have pronouns in her bio. And then when she finally did, in reference to R2D2, she said that her pronouns were boop, beep, boop,
which again, that's not a reference to R2D2. It's like, you can say that it is because he's a robot, but he makes a lot of sounds. He goes, Meow. She's supposed to include that too to make sure that everybody gets the reference.
Which is pretty funny. But you're not allowed to joke about the sacred pronouns. We must not joke. That is heresy. One of several.
It's not good to make fun of people who are marginalized during their marginalization.
Several heretical outbursts from Carano, whose real sin, whose only sin, as far as the left is concerned, is that she doesn't agree with them. She has a number of views that do not align with leftism. She expressed those views, and that's why they wanted her destroyed. And ultimately,
But when you're expressing your views, is it punching downwards? Are you basically denigrating a marginalized group? That's the thing that's in question here. And most of the arguments that come from conservatives are an attack on marginalized groups. They're pretty consistent with that.
They got what they wanted. What do we learn from this? Well, nothing, really. I mean, we learned what we already knew, that we live in a time when rigid ideological conformity is demanded. Carano isn't being shipped off to a death camp, of course, but her case does demonstrate the sort of dehumanization that you do find in our culture.
Again, she hasn't been dehumanized because she was fired. That's not what's happening.
She's being lied about and defamed. And the people doing it know what they're doing, and they don't care. They can look at that post she put up there. They know that's not anti-Semitic, and they also know that they themselves have made exactly that kind of point a million times.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's anti-Semitic, but it is pretty ignorant.
But they're defaming her anyway. They honestly believe that anyone who disagrees with them deserves that treatment. You can lie about them and destroy them. It doesn't matter. They do not recognize any kind of moral obligation or standard when dealing with the cultural heretics. You can shut them down, shut them up, cast them out, lie about them. That's the only goal. So, ironically, the point Carano was making in her supposedly offensive Instagram post has been aptly illustrated by the outrage response to it. Listen.
Man, I really hope that they all get their stuff together, like all the conservatives.
Today on the Matt Walsh Show, the cancel culture claims 3 victims last week.
Oh my goodness, Matt. Accidentally clicked on that video. But, I hope that they all, like all the conservatives and all of these Ayn Randian people just kind of collect all their stuff, find an island, and go create John's Gulch, because they want to live in an alternative reality where, like, the nuclear family, conservative traditional values, and conservative social views are solely protected. And it's gatekeeping. It honestly is, because it doesn't allow trans people. It doesn't allow people that don't fit inside the Judeo-Christian values. It doesn't fit until recently, and Dave Rubin is somehow trying to change it. It doesn't fit homosexuality. It doesn't fit immigrants or asylum seekers or refugees. So, like, it would be great if they just decided to be like, go somewhere so they can be left alone, and so they can also leave others alone, because obviously there is no agreement to the views, at least at this point in time. And I don't know if there ever will be in the United States, so long as we have so many echo chambers constantly feeding the culture war that divides the working class people. All right. So, wrapping it up with Tucker Carlson's Tucker Carlson Tonight, why the left wants to shut down Fox News. Let's cancel some more. Let's get them canceled. Let's do it.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Happy Thursday. So why are the Democrats so angry? We've asked that question a number of times. It doesn't seem to make any sense, truly. In November, the Democratic Party won everything, full control of the federal government.
So just before we really get into this, Fox News has a study out on it that says that viewers of Fox News tend to be less informed than people who don't consume news whatsoever. And Fox News, and then I have here from Insider in 2020, Fox News won a court case by persuasively arguing that no reasonable viewer takes Tucker Carlson seriously. So it's not about their views in themselves, it's about the misinformation that they peddle. Before we even get into all of this, it's about peddling misinformation and steering people away from anything that actually empowers them to be politically active.
Government. They seethed for years while they were out of power. That made sense. But winning seemed to enrage them even more. Did you watch Democrats on television today at the impeachment hearings? They are crazy person mad, florid-faced, irrational, yelling and making threats. It is bizarre. You'd think they get to work fixing the country they inherited. They promised to do that. Instead, they said about breaking things and hurt.
I like how he says that, and then whenever like Biden signs an executive order to steer the executive branch away from Trump's policies, he's like, dictator. He's a dictator. He's a tyrant. But that's him literally putting to work to reverse the most corrosive effects of Trump's policies.
Hurting people. What is going on here? Well, maybe it's intrinsic. There's a certain sort of low-character person who becomes more vicious in victory. Power makes them mean. The Ottomans destroyed the cities they captured. There was never a good reason to do this, to kill people who had already been captured and who had surrendered. The Ottomans did it because they enjoyed it. Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi have a little bit of that in them, it looks like.
That's hilarious. As if like the Ottomans were the only ones who did that. As if the Ottomans were the only ones who took slaves and then also killed like any survivors of the battles or of the destroyed cities. Okay.
Imagine being Adam Schiff's landscaper or Nancy Pelosi's housekeeper or anyone at their command. Imagine how they treat the staff when no restaurant. How would they tip? You know the answer. They're the kind of people who flatter the boss and scream at the interns. They suck up and they
Probably.
spit down. Jeff Bezos is a god to them. You mean nothing. So naturally, the Democratic Party is constructing a world designed to serve Jeff Bezos. You're an afterthought in that world. If you get
Which, like, Tucker Carlson is there to serve Rupert Murdoch, and you're an afterthought to his world. He even said in a podcast interview that he is Rupert Murdoch's bitch. What a shill.
in the way, they will punish you. They already are punishing you. Your right to say and think what you want, to read and watch what you want, threatens them above all. Why? Because if you have access to information, you can form your own judgments, judgments that are independent of theirs. A free internet is their enemy. The moment they took power, they began a kind of counter-reformation against the free internet. They started the most sweeping mass censorship campaign in the history of this country, and it's accelerating even now. Yesterday, for example, Google pulled a pro-life news site off of YouTube. Why'd they do that? Simple. Google supports abortion. A lot of big corporations do. Children distract the labor force. If you're raising your family, you are not serving shareholders. Google doesn't want a debate on this subject, so they just shut the debate down. Hundreds of thousands of subscribers to LifeSite News will no longer be watching videos that question abortion because they're not allowed to. Then today, Twitter shut down James O'Keefe's Project Veritas Twitter feed.
Which spreads so much disinformation and takes a lot of content out of context. Yeah, they're one of the biggest misinformation propagandists out there. So I'm not going to shed a tear over Project Veritas. I did kind of like what they did with the DNC back during 2016 because it kind of showed that politics are really dirty. But that was before I had realized that they have a severe right-wing bias that basically they hide whatever the right wing does the same way that Andy No does for far right.
No, instead of ridiculous.
But here's the Tucker Carlson clip here.
Religious.
Yeah, now you got me thinking about it.
No, see, that doesn't work.
Yeah,
that's what I'm
It's got to
saying.
be Fast Food Nation was a good one. You know what I mean?
Or Supersize Me.
Yeah, Supersize Me. That's a great one. I totally agree with that. Was Fast Food Nation
Crucify me. That would have worked.
How about God Sucks?
That works too.
Religious. Yeah, I don't know.
Religious.
I mean, beating up on religious people is too easy. I mean, come on.
No way.
Beating up on Christians, give me a break.
We're supposed to sit around and let the Christians beat up on us for years and years and years and not fight back?
That's ridiculous. I mean, the threat is from radical Muslims, and for some reason, the same people are always beating up on the evangelicals are always giving the Muslims a pass.
Well, I give neither.
You never hear Bill Maher going after them.
Are you kidding me? He does a whole skits about fucking Ahmed and the bomb shop.
Yeah, I'm glad he called him out on that because Bill Maher is really Islamophobic.
He beats up on the Islam all the time.
Yeah, are you kidding me? Come on, Tucker.
Really? Because I'll take your word for it because I know you probably watch more of that than I do. But every time I've been on a show or heard him, it's always beating up on some snake handler in Kentucky who's not hurting anybody.
Whatever that big new network announcement you were going to give us in a week.
Oh, about my new job?
Yeah.
I'm not getting a new job. I'm just going to be hanging around the same old
hold on.
pathetic, unemployed, unshaven in his boxer shorts at noon kind of guy.
Were you up for one and it fell through, or were you screwed?
No, dude, who'd employ me? I just look, I've got the perfect life right now. I just, I get up late, I go down,
how do you pay your bill?
Coffee, read the newspapers, stuff like that. Juice a Nicorette, go out to lunch.
How do you pay your bills?
Well, I'm extraordinarily loaded just from money I inherited from my number of trust funds.
From the Swanson.
Totally.
From the Swanson deal.
Yeah.
And this is supposedly the populist Tucker Carlson here saying that he doesn't even really need to work. He's extremely loaded. And so here's the one on Rupert Murdoch.
Example, Sean Hannity was set to broadcast live from a Tea Party. And Rupert Murdoch the day before said, no, we don't support the Tea Party, we don't support the Republican Party, we don't support any party. And Rupert Murdoch did pull Hannity off of broadcasting live from the Tea Party.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more complicated than that, but it was. I think it was a miscommunication. But look, you can go to the Tea Party events. I've been to a lot of Tea Party events. I spoke at a Tea Party event. And I wasn't, I'm not running as a Tea Party candidate. I'm not giving money to Tea Party people. I just, it's a great place to reach people,
Sure, but what I'm saying is, at that point, Rupert Murdoch didn't want Hannity broadcasting from there.
Yeah, well, something happened, no doubt about that. I don't know if was it Murdoch?
Yeah, it was because Murdoch received the question. They said, "Hey, you guys, Fox News, are part of
Murdoch's the most powerful man in America."
I mean, Rupert Murdoch, I've got to give him credit. When you talk about media conglomerates, he really knows what he's doing.
Yes.
He is smart.
He's very smart.
Really smart and tough.
You're his bitch.
I'm 100% his bitch. Whatever Mr. Murdoch says, I do.
Exactly.
Period.
You know how you treat your migrant workers that shine up your Bentley and stuff? That Robert Murdoch could treat you that way.
Really?
Yep.
I would be honored if he would cane me the way I cane my workers, my servants. One of them this morning, there was a spot on the back. You couldn't see it, but on one of my wingtips, and whoa. Hell to pay.
He took an ass whipping for that, didn't he?
Well, first I threw my pomegranate at him. He was across the room.
Right.
And then the silver service. And I said, come here, and I kind of hobbled after him with one shoe on. I caught him finally.
Yeah. He didn't, and he let you catch him because if he would have kept running, that would have been more of an ass whooping like Kunta Kinte.
I think he enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And that is the fake populist, real elitist Tucker Carlson right there, admitting that he is 100% Rupert Murdoch's bitch. So I think it's hilarious that he's going to accuse Democrats of being Jeff Bezos's bitch, because he's so openly right-wing propaganda bitch.
There was no justifiable reason to do this, but no one in the media asked questions about it or appeared to consider it a problem. Quote, Project Veritas has been known, Politico announced gravely, to spread misinformation.
Yep.
Now, the person who wrote that sentence, a child reporter called Anna, whose Twitter handle brags she went to Cornell, didn't even bother to explain what that so-called misinformation was. But you know what it was. Project Veritas had criticized the people in charge. That's enough now.
Project Veritas has been accused many times. A lot of their people that they get on their videos have said that James O'Keefe offered them $10,000 to basically lie. And you can find these cases throughout time because it's happened multiple times to them. So it's very easy to find where exactly Project Veritas has made missteps. So Tucker Carlson here obviously providing cover for them because Rupert Murdoch told him to.
Anna didn't question that standard. She seemed pleased to play a role in silencing grown-up reporters. She thinks that's her job. Good work, Anna. You work at Politico now. You get to be America's room monitor and tell the rest of us what to say. How empowering. All the child reporters feel that way. That's why they're in favor of it. So Project Veritas is off Twitter tonight, but the Red Guards still aren't satisfied. They will not rest until there is not a single human being remaining in all American media who questions any of the platitudes that Anna and her friends memorized at Cornell in lieu of an...
I love how he's acting like this is like organized, like we have a vanguard who's going out shutting down conservatives for the sake of a broader communist movement. He didn't exactly say it like that, but that's the kind of implication by saying Red Guard, but that's very funny. It's mostly disorganized, and it's not even just communists. There's a lot of liberals who are joining on the bandwagon of shutting up conservatives for their misinformation campaigns.
Actual education.
But to right-wingers, there's no difference between liberals and communists. You cut a liberal and a communist bleeds to them. But that's not how the quote goes now, does it, Tucker?
Diversity is our strength. Trans rights are human rights. Abortion is health care. They don't think about it. They just accept whatever the Central Committee decides is the slogan of the day. And anyone who mocks or disagrees with those slogans is silenced.
Which is also very funny because the Republicans, like the elected officials, have daily morning briefings to go over the message of the day, and right-wing media outlets do the same with all of their pundits. It's so funny how they always project what they do and say that the other side is guilty of it. That's very funny to me.
Name of diversity, we must have uniformity. Well, of all the impediments to achieving this goal of uniformity, those would include centuries of tradition, the First Amendment to the Constitution, the fact this was a free country. Of all of those, it's this channel, Fox News, that is the most significant hurdle to getting everyone to sing from the same song sheet. Fox is the last big organization in the American news media that differs in even the smallest ways from the other big news organizations. The only one, that's it, just us. At this point, there's everyone else.
I'm going to find the study again. And it was reported by many people. Apparently NPR's listeners are best informed, but it came out in 2012 that Fox viewers are the worst informed. You have the Daily Beast also reporting this. You have Rolling Stone. You have Mercury News. You had Mod B. You have HuffPost. You have a lot of people posting this survey when it came out in 2012, not survey, but a study that said watching only Fox News makes you less informed than watching no news at all. There's evidence, a full-on evidence that says how bad Fox News is for you. So him saying that they are the only bastion to information and knowledge and freedom. No, he's actually arguing against your best interest to dig you further into the rabbit hole of being misinformed.
In the media standing.
And it's so obvious, too, after that clip, how he said that he threw a pomegranate at his worker. He has a disdain for workers that's actually in his bones. He's an elitist.
In crisp formation in their starched matching uniforms and their little caps, patiently awaiting orders from the billionaire class. And then there's Fox News, off by itself, occasionally saying things that are slightly different from everyone else. On Fox, there are still journalists who are willing to think for themselves sometimes and brave enough to say so out loud. It seems like that's what journalism should be, but in 2021, it's a very rare thing. And
who was that poor woman? There was a movie that was made about her. I don't think it was Megyn Kelly, was it? But there was that woman who was sexually harassed, and several other women who were sexually harassed at Fox News, and they came out about it. They whistle blew, and they were fired. They were let go. Alongside, what was his name? Roger Ailes, who did a lot of that abuse. So very fascinating here how you can say that Fox News still has journalists who can think for themselves sometimes, but when they think critically about Fox News, not that way.
Oligarchs hate it. Jeff Bezos, for one, has had enough of it. Bezos has sent forth his personal scribes from the Washington Post to make us go away, to end Fox News. On command, they've written a number of columns suggesting that Fox News must be silenced. They've gone on television to demand that Fox News is silenced.
I do think that if we're going to have unity in this country, especially along the lines of working class individuals, that, yeah, Fox News needs to go. And those who peddle the same kind of news as Fox News needs to go. There's probably a way to do conservative news without it being completely misinformation, but unfortunately there isn't that for conservatives right now. Most of them participate in bad faith arguments and disinformation to keep you away from your actual best interests.
Here's one of Jeff Bezos' employees.
There are other options, including the fact that cable operators like Comcast and Charter, which send Fox out to hundreds of millions of people, they can demand some accountability in the way that Facebook and Twitter have done. And there's also, I think, the possibility of reviving the fairness doctrine.
There are a lot of ways to silence Fox News, he has explained on television and in columns. But he doesn't call it silencing Fox News. He says, we must demand some accountability, authorize questions, no more criticizing Jeff Bezos.
I don't think he said that
He's
either.
not the only one saying it.
It's bad faith.
In the last 30 days, a single columnist at the New York Times called Nick Kristof has written 3 separate columns demanding that someone please yank this news channel off the air immediately. Just yesterday, Kristof suggested that this show, the one you're watching, was somehow guilty of terrorism, of violence, something that we've been opposed consistently for 4 years.
Tucker Carlson's own lawyer argued that no reasonable viewer would take Tucker Carlson seriously. His own lawyer argued that in court. It's on record.
4 years. How are we guilty of that and why? Well, because Ashley Babbitt, the unarmed protester shot to death at the Capitol on January 6th, apparently watched this show from time to time at 8 p.m. Now, keep in mind that Ashley Babbitt is dead. She paid quite a price for trying to enter the speaker's lobby without permission, and no one mourned her. What kind of country is it, by the way? And we're saying this as a show that was against what they did on January 6th from the second they did it. But what kind of country is it where nobody says, whoa, wait, that's kind of sad? They shot an unarmed woman? Is that really a death penalty offense? How hard-hearted are we that no one can even acknowledge that's sad, which it is? What kind of country is it where a Republican member of Congress from Oklahoma applauded her death immediately? Nick Kristof is applauding it, but for Nick Kristof, her death is not enough.
I don't think he is applauding it, and I don't know how he's making that through line. Also, he didn't play that representative's clip applauding it as well. I don't know anybody who actually applauded the death of a woman at the Capitol. I don't know anybody of that. And are we going to talk about the cop who also died there? Are we going to talk about him, Tucker?
Now we need to ban any television shows that Ashley Babbitt may have watched.
That's not the through line here, and that's the spin on the narrative. It has a lot to do with the fact that people that watch your show are less informed.
We're not even going to rebut that. It's not even worth your time to hear us explain why that is irrational. It's self-evidently irrational. Paul Pot reads the New York Times, therefore we need to close the paper down? John Wayne Gacy liked a Nick Kristof column, therefore Nick Kristof is guilty of mass murder? He's a serial...
This doesn't even make any sense. This is such a bad faith argument, and it has actual no through line whatsoever because it's baseless. We're not even in reality anymore. We're talking in a sarcastic, hypothetical realm that's not even real. John Wayne Gacy, I don't think liked a Nick Kristof article because I don't even know if Nick Kristof was writing at the time John Wayne Gacy was murdering kids.
Serial killer too? That's what Nick Kristof is saying. We would never say something like that, ever. It's too stupid. But nothing is too stupid for Nick Kristof or the New York Times. What Kristof lacks in reason, he makes up for with vehemence. Nick Kristof, in the end, cannot stand the idea that someone somewhere might be publicly disagreeing with him. So he's calling for forcible censorship. What would be nice is if he just said it out.
Again, it's not about disagreeing. It's solely about misinformation and leaving people less informed than they were before watching you.
Loud. Yeah, I'm calling for censorship. Be a man about it and admit what you're doing. But of course he'll never do that. These are not men. These are craven servants of the Democratic Party. They are.
Which is better that he's like, throwing all these adjectives on him, being a coward and all of that shit, and probably not even inviting him to the show to defend himself.
Are feline, not canine. All of their aggression is passive aggression. Watch another slope-shouldered tool of the oligarchy feign outrage that we have called censorship what it is, censorship. Oh, but it's not censorship, he whines. It's harm reduction.
And remember, he said he would be honored if Rupert Murdoch would cane him the way he canes his own workers and servants. This guy is a tool for the oligarchy. This guy is a shill for billionaires. And what's funny is that clip that went viral where that guy told him on his show, which never aired, but he told him that Tucker Carlson is a millionaire funded by billionaires. Let's stop playing here.
And Tucker Carlson is telling viewers that this network, CNN, is trying to force Fox News off the air, which is patently false. But while some cry cancel culture, let me suggest a different way to think about this. A harm reduction model. But reducing a liar's reach is not the same as censoring freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is different than freedom of reach.
Oh, let me suggest a different model. The harm reduction model. Notice the seductively imprecise language of personal therapy. We're all AOC now. It's all about us. It's not a fascist crackdown on free speech by ruthless and power-mad billionaires. No, not at all. It's just harm reduction, like methadone or Nicorette. It's a way to get better. When they come for you, they will talk like social workers.
I mean, that's actually a funny comparison to say that they're like Nicorette, but honestly, Fox News is cigarettes. Yeah, I would agree with the characterization that CNN is Nicorette because they don't actually make any meaningful criticisms of the establishment for the most part. That's why they're more like Nicorette gum, but Fox News is full on cigarettes. It feels good when you're puffing it, but ultimately it is killing you. So that's great. That's Tucker Carlson, the elitist shill for Rupert Murdoch, and that is going to be Tox News for today. Follow me on Toxin on Twitter at ToxinPod, ToxnPod. You can see the video itself where you can see my beautiful face, wonderful flag on YouTube. Under Tox News. Got writings on portumrebellion.net, and then you can find this podcast wherever you get your casted pods. So catch me next time, and let's continue detoxing this because obviously the work still has to be done because Fox News is not being held accountable anytime soon. Thanks for watching and listening. Blah, blah, blah. Have a good one.